Thank you for joining XROM, which is India's first virtual reality focused podcast. And today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. Thomas Kuriakose, who's the founder of Atman Software. He's been in the gaming industry for over 20 years. Now, building a game takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time. It takes an effort. It requires a big team because there's a lot of things involved when you are building a game, right from the game engine, the programming, the graphics, the animation, the sound, the music, the production, packaging it all together, taking it to the distributor, the gaming channel, having it all out there. It for all of that requires a huge team. And the entire thing, Thomas, you've been doing it all yourself. And I need to tell this to my audience because I think Thomas had reached out to me a couple of weeks earlier. And he reached out to review his new game called BLR80. And that's when I realized that there's this Thomas Kuriakose who exists in Bangalore, who's been at the forefront of gaming industry from 2000, I believe, right? So Thomas, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Why don't we start with a little background, intro, and your journey into the gaming world?
I'm the founder and developer of Atman Software, a company that I founded in 1999 to primarily focus on real-time interactive computer graphics. And over the last 2 decades, I've been working on games and the technologies that power them, not just for games alone, but also for interactive visualizations. My latest creation is BLR80, which is a virtual reality-based sci-fi action shooter set in the future in the city of Bangalore, India. BLR80 is currently available now on the Meta and Steam platforms.
You've been into the gaming industry for 20 years, and like I said, I mentioned earlier, what caught my attention was, while making these games, you need an entire team of people to put together a game, but you've been doing this entirely on your own, and that's what completely caught my attention. Talk to us about your journey, the 20 years you've been in the space, and maybe if you want, maybe you could talk about your first game, Coda, maybe you could talk about that, how did you get into it? What is the game? It's a Rubik's Cube simulation, right? So maybe you could talk about, start from there, and then maybe we could go progressively and get into your the other efforts, and then BLR80 is obviously the new one. We'll get into it later. We'll do a complete deep dive, but I want to understand, and I'm sure even my audience would want to understand your story, because you are a single member team who's been defying all the odds and who's been in the gaming industry, doing all this, creating games, putting it out for the longest time, right? So why don't we start with your early days in the career, how you started, your first game, Coda, and maybe what's the highlights and the learnings from your first game, and then maybe you can take it out from there.
As children, my brother and I, we were very fascinated by computer games, and we would watch, our friends, play on these Game Boys and Game & Watches, and we would be very interested with video games in general. And sometime in 1996, a friend of mine introduced me to this computer game called Quake, which literally quaked my, understanding of video games. And ever since then, I've been fascinated with 3D computer graphics. Back then in 1995, when I was in college, my friends and I, we would, program computer graphics, 2D computer graphics. And then that evolved into 3D computer graphics. And when I graduated, I wanted to work with real-time computer graphics, and there weren't any studios doing that. So I decided to start one on my own. And that is how Atman Software came to be. And my first project that I worked on at Atman was this simulation of a Rubik's Cube, wherein I wrote the 3D rendering library and the gameplay and did the art and all of that. There were some friends who helped me with the art, with Coda. But yeah, it had a custom engine, and it ran on DOS. And it was a very simple engine compared to modern engine standards. And this was in the year 1999. It was written for DOS, and it had no concept of cameras. It had no concept of textures or audio. It was a simple engine which basically projected 3D points onto a 2D screen. and the cube itself was modeled on paper, and then the values were entered onto the screen, onto the computer, and you had the cube. One interesting thing that Coda had was real-time per pixel lighting. You could dynamically move lights around, and you could see how the cube was lit and all of that. And apart from that, from a gameplay point of view, it had cube solving, AI, and that was my first game. Pretty soon after that, I started working on IO, which was a Windows-based game, and I wrote the engine for IO. And IO was a 3D side scroller. And unlike the engine for Coda, this one was more comparable to modern engines. It had the concept of cameras and textures and audio and everything that goes with the rendering pipeline, like clipping and frustum culling and all of that, right? And it had skeletal animation and real-time lights and shadows and all of that. And that was IO. Again, that game took about 6 years to make because I had all this learning to make, how to program in the DOS and writing the 3D engine, and then learning how to model and learning how to animate and texture and all of those things. I was released for both Windows and the Mac. The engine was programmed for both the PowerPC based Macs and Intel Windows machines. And after all this, by the time I'd finished IO, I was really tired of making games, and I started programming other things. I took a break from games, and I realized that for me, making games was really hard. And I'm not talking about the technology. The technology was easier, but the gameplay, game design, all of those things that make a game fun, that was not really my strength. And then sometime in 2010, I put together a team to work on real-time architecture visualizations. And then something else happened. Unreal and Unity, all these engines, they almost became free. So when they became free, it didn't make any more sense for me to sit and write an engine that would allow me to do architecture visualizations. I might as well use Unreal and Unity. So therefore, I stopped work on Render. I shut it down. I also had to, lay off the team because now we were not going to do architecture visualizations. After that, I've always wanted to make a game that was based in India, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to try and make this game in Unreal, and it's going to be for VR. And there's a reason why I chose VR. That's because I knew there was no way that I was going to be able to compete with other mobile phone games or other PC games. So it had to be in a market where it was relatively easier to compete. So I chose VR, and I made BLR 80.
So Thomas, I think you said a lot of things. So I'm just going to break it down for the audience. You said that you started in early 2000s. That was your first game which you built, which was Coda, which was a Rubik's Cube simulator. From there on, you went to building a second game, which was titled IO. And what you did was you built your own gaming engine. And from there, you mentioned that from the gaming industry, you kind of pivoted. And you looked at, from the gaming, you looked at the enterprise side, and you built RenderBee, which is an architecture visualization tool. From there, again, you went and built the same thing, which was browser based. So this is too many things kind of, I want you to try and compress it and simplify this to my audience further. Talk about the first game, Coda, that you said that there was cube solving AI over there. Maybe address that. Talk to me about that. And because it was the game was 2000, right? 1999, 2000. How did you leverage AI for cube solving? Talk about your game engine, and then also talk about this pivot that you mentioned. You built your after building your game engine, you went and built your own architecture visualization tool. Maybe address that also.
It also had cube solving algorithms. I did not invent these algorithms. There are cube solving solutions, right? I just wrote I just converted that into code. And so that was the game. and it had two modes. It had this mode where the computer would jumble up a cube for you and present it to you, and you would have to solve the cube. Or if you had a cube at home, and if you wanted to solve your cube, you would get a blank cube on the screen, and you could paint it the way your physical cube was. And then you could ask the computer to solve it for you, and you could follow it step by step, and you would have a solved cube in hand. So that was the game, right? And one of the, from a graphical point of view, it also had a real-time per pixel lighting. Just to, that's one of those things that I found very interesting back then. So that was the Coda game. And that was a free game. It was released for free on some websites and all of that. So that was Coda.
You want to talk a little bit more about the gaming engine that you built?
I wrote the entire 3D rendering graphics library for Coda, which meant you would have to start off from the pixel, right? How would you put a pixel on the screen? So it started from there, right? And that was a lot of fun programming because you could directly access video card memory. Back in the day, you had something called VGA cards. So you would have to program, and you would have to put a certain value in a certain memory location if you wanted to light up a pixel on the screen. So you would start from there. You would plot a pixel on the screen, and then you will learn how to draw lines, and then you will learn how to draw triangles, and then you will learn how to make 3D cubes, right? And then you would have the Rubik's Cube, and on top of that, I added the per pixel lighting thing. And that was it. That was very basic, very basic 3D engine. It had support for, keyboard, and it also had support for a mouse under DOS. So that was the engine back then for Coda.
The technology which is in the hype cycle today is the metaverse, and there's a lot of interpretations by various front movers of the technology. Somebody who's been invested in the space for over 20 plus years. Would you be able to kind of define what metaverse is?
But the metaverse is not a new term or concept, right? It's more than 2 decades old. There is this novel called Snow Crash, which came out sometime early 1990s. And that book introduced the concept of the metaverse and the term itself. I remember some 20 years ago reading about John Carmack's motivation for multiplayer Quake. And that was 20 years ago. And his motivation was the metaverse, right? Now, the question is, what is the metaverse? To me, the metaverse is just a confined multiplayer space, right? For instance, you have games like World of Warcraft, which allows you to have thousands of players playing on one server at a time, and they're all interacting with each other. And in modern times, like today, you have games like Fortnite, which allows hundreds of players to connect together on a server at the same time, right? You extend that, right? Not just for gaming, but for any other kind of activity as well. And you extend it by the number of people who can simultaneously connect. And then at that point, you're beginning to build on what is known as the metaverse, right? Now, if you could have millions of people connecting together in a virtual space, right? And not everyone has to be playing games. You would have a bunch of people playing games in one corner. You might have other people just taking a stroll down a lane. So this world, which allows you to just log in and experience this alternate reality, or a second life, if you may, this world is the metaverse. People like to associate 3D computer graphics with the metaverse because the book Snow Crash from back then, described the metaverse in a particular way, where people just logged in and they would interact and do things. Now, modern day metaverse, like the one Facebook keeps talking about, their goals are, is much bigger from the original idea of the metaverse, right? Where everybody just logs into the computer and plays a game or something. It is much more advanced than that. By that, I mean, first of all, the metaverse is going to be very difficult to build, right? Just for one company, because it's like the internet, right? The internet is there. No one single company owns it, and no one single person creates all the content on the internet, right? The metaverse has to be that way. It's just a space. Anybody can create content and put on there, and everybody else can come in and join it and experience it. So what companies like Facebook or anybody else who's trying to create the metaverse can do is they can just create the space or platform for others to come and create content on top of it and engage. Now, Facebook is uniquely positioned to advance the metaverse because they have a couple of things going on for them. One is that they've already, with their social media platform, connected a whole bunch of people, right? Now, on top of that, they have some advanced hardware in the fields of VR. And then there's also AR, right? So the metaverse that I see is that you would have this space where people can just log in and experience the world. They don't really have to use VR goggles or whatnot. They can just experience it on a PC, on a flat screen, right? That is one way to do it. And if you have VR headsets, maybe you could, get another level of immersion and you could walk around and do things. But it could also be AR, right? You could just be going around in real life, doing your, going on with your day, but you have your AR glasses and whatnot, and whatever information that exists in the metaverse can be augmented onto your AR glasses. So you might be looking at something, but you're still seeing metaverse-related information on the real world. So, and Facebook is uniquely positioned to do that because they have all this hardware, that they're working on, VR and AR and all of that. And then they also have the social media platforms that allow all these connections to happen. So I think that's what the metaverse is. It's going to be this huge space where people connect in and then they create all this content and, everybody just enjoys their experiences. And it doesn't have to be merely for fun. It can also be, for education and other business, commerce-related purposes as well.
It's a very exciting space. I guess, we just, obviously you mentioned, because there's so many guys who are kind of, giving out the explanation, what the metaverse is going to be. But I think it's all assumptions because I guess, once it comes together, it's not going to be one technology. It's not going to be just augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and even if it's all of those three layers are there, you need various underlying, tech stack to kind of drive the conversation forward because, you'll need 5G, to drive the high bandwidth, low latency bit. You'll need AI to, for your digital intelligent avatars. You'll need IoT for possibly physically scanning those physical objects, bringing into the digital world. You also mentioned about augmented reality where you could just be walking and there'll be these layers of information out there, annotated, and you could learn from it, and you mentioned that it could be used for education, healthcare. And now tell me, there are these companies such as Nvidia who are going a little bit beyond. They're pushing the boundary. You said, it doesn't necessarily have to be 3D. It could be 3D, it could be 2D, it could be a mix of all of those. And we're just laying the building blocks. But I mentioned about Nvidia, Jensen Huang, the CEO, who was mentioning, and he's working on, when he's working on his platform Omniverse, he's looking at simulating even the physics around, and there are companies who are working on the haptic feedbacks and stuff like that, and games largely. I think the reason I think gaming, the industry has really accelerated because unlike your entertainment content, it's always passive because you just sit and watch. You're not interactive. You're not interacting with the content, and gaming gives you that experience. It brings that thrill out in you that you are part of it. And now the gameplay itself is changing, with tech stacks such as virtual reality coming in, tech stacks such as haptic feedback coming in, where you could be touch feeling the virtual world. And then there's this artificial intelligence which is going bonkers in the space. We can do right now, AI, which is text to code, text to image, text to video generation. How's all this going to impact? What's the future of gaming looks like according to you, for someone who's been vested in the space for the longest time and then being in it, what's the future of the gaming? How is it going to look like? And maybe address that the metaverse part itself. Is it going to be similar to a physical world?
See, there's a space for all kinds of games, right? I mean, even now, there's a space for flat 2D games, right? And 2D games have always existed for the longest time. There'll always be a space for that. There will always be a space for simple, I mean, by simple, I mean non-VR 3D games. You might have new technologies coming in and all of that, and all of these technologies will only enhance these kinds of games, but I think it'll mostly be these same things. You might have new additions. You might have holographic, games where you could, interact with holograms, and all of those things might come. But I think pretty much it's going to be the same. You might have new categories, but you will have flat screen games, and you'll have 2D games, and you will have virtual reality games with haptic feedback, as you were saying. I think it's pretty much going to be these things. But of course, the graphics will improve, the intelligence will improve, the gameplay will improve. I pretty much see it that way.
The reason I'm saying this because, forever we've been restricted to a 2D interface when we physically experience everything in 3D. And through our interface, which is about to change, with these head wearable devices which are just coming in, possibly I think almost or some of the big brands are working on it, and I think Apple should be launching maybe the first quarter of 2023. Geo is launching maybe the end of the year, and I think that's going to be a game changer, because as soon as you launch, make it accessible for the common man, then the entire world becomes a screen, and then we start experiencing things in 3D, exactly how we experience in our real life. So I feel personally that, that's going to be a complete game changer. Now you have just created BLR 80, a new game. Before we get into the gaming and the process of the game building, why don't you talk to us about the world that you have imagined, Bangalore 80? What's the story behind it, concept behind it?
So, as I was saying earlier, I've been wanting to make a game that was set in India. In 2020, I thought, okay, there is Unreal Engine now, and maybe I can just make a small game. And the goal was just to make a small, short game, something that I could do by myself. And so I'm not a big proponent of stories in games. I like to keep the story very light. I just need the action or the challenge or some puzzle or something. So the story was, was actually an afterthought. The main thing that I wanted in the game was that I need guns and I need to shoot at something. And I don't really like humans. I find humans really boring to shoot at in games. So I either prefer robots or aliens or demons, right? So in this game, I set about making robots, and then I put together a story. And the story is, okay, there's some backstory to the main story. But the backstory is that in the year 2030, there is a war, and it's all cyber warfare, and India is part of the war as well. And because there's a cyber warfare, there is a lot of AI and AGI involved. But somehow India wins the war, right? And that is because of a particular company called OJI, right? And a technology that they developed. It's called symbiotic intelligence, and that is what helped the country win the war. And so, what is symbiotic intelligence? It's a method where human brains connect with the computer, and the human brains are the ones that are actually doing the computing, right? So in the context of OJI, there is a central computing cortex, which is called the CCC, which is a computer actually. All that it does is it delegates tasks to human brains that are connected to it. Now, these human brains that are connected to it are normal individuals, right? Like you and I, and we choose to link with the CCC, right? And there's a certain cutoff in terms of IQ, right? You need to be a high IQ individual to be able to take part in the program, and you interface with the CCC using a brain neural interface. And once you do that, the CCC can assign you tasks, which your brain can then compute and send the data back. Now, what is also interesting there is that all of this computing is done unconsciously, right? For instance, if the computer were to give you a task like multiply two 4-digit numbers, you don't have to mentally, consciously think about it. The brain just does it, right? Well, at least that's the fiction in the story. So this happens, and because of symbiotic intelligence, India wins the war, and this technology catches on, and over the next few decades, it advances, and a lot of things change. A lot of people with high IQs within the country, they all plug in, not over the course of a whole day, but like a 9-to-5 job. They just plug in, and then they do all these tasks that the computer assigns them to, and then they plug out, and then they continue with their lives, right? So these individuals with high IQs, right, in society, they obviously become very successful. They make lots of money and all of that. They become the new upper caste people, right? They're called BGVs, right? And the ones with not so high IQs, right, the ones that are not qualified to connect, they're called the Bilwas, right? So there is that stratification in society. And life goes on, right? But over the next few decades, what happens is OJI, they begin to get very greedy with power and all of that. And the version of SI, symbiotic intelligence, it keeps advancing. And come 2079, they're about to release a new update. And this new update, what's going to happen with that update is that they're going to have control over your brain, right? And you're not going to be able to stop them. They can just log into your brain, and then you, at that point, you just become a zombie, right? They can make you do anything, right? So they're working on that update. And in the game, you play an engineer who used to work with OJI and who becomes aware of this particular plan. And you blow the whistle, and everybody's against you. You become a fugitive. Society doesn't believe you. The usual stuff, right? Society doesn't believe you. You become a fugitive. But you realize that even though the media, the people, society, they don't believe this, the update is going to happen. December 31st, 2079, this update is going to happen. And then from that point on, it's too late. So you decide, okay, you've got to do something. So there's this little window where you are able to access the mainframe computers in the science station. You take advantage of that, and you're supposed to get to the mainframe computers and infiltrate the computing station and make sure that the update doesn't happen. That's what the game is.
Whatever you mentioned, there are people who are kind of already, doing this bit, when you're talking about, symbiotic intelligence, there's Neuralink who are already, and it's not just Neuralink, there's Kernel and so many others who are already working on brain-computer interface. So this actually seems like something which could possibly happen in the near future, because with the way technology is growing, I think if we do not have conversations where we involve the larger community, the larger people, I think tech can be something. It can be something which could go very dystopian also. But I'm not someone who's a proponent of, I've always been someone who says that, tech is that partner which can create a great future if we kind of handhold and create a conversation where the tech goes, it benefits everyone. When does this gameplay come online, and how can we experience this game?
Okay, so the game goes live today. So by the time I suppose the podcast is on, people can actually download and play the game. It's available on both Meta and Steam, right? And it is VR only.
How excited are you for India's XR ecosystem? What do you think can be done to grow the ecosystem? Is Atman Software funded? And what comes next?
Well, I don't think in terms of India, but generally we live in very exciting times, right? The technologies and the jump in technologies that we see in our lifetimes are very large, like the internet and then virtual reality, 3D graphics, all of this like pretty large. And even VR itself, right? The way these headsets are shrinking. Like if you look at how it went from Rift to Quest, that itself is a huge jump, right? With the Rift, you had external sensors and all of that. But with the Rift, completely, wireless and inside-out tracking and all of that. It's amazing what the Quest does. And now you have headsets with higher pixel density and higher resolutions and eye tracking. All of these things coming in, and they're also getting smaller, right? At some point, you might have all of these things as a contact lens that you just wear, right? So the future looks, extremely, extremely exciting to me, right? And I'm glad I live in these times, right? And of course, because these technologies are going to evolve and all of that, every country that participates in these things also benefit. So India also stands to benefit.
My last question to you: the future of gaming, because it's looking superbly exciting. Like you mentioned, we shrinking technology. We going from possibly like these big bulky virtual reality headset to possibly lenses, and then lenses to, you mentioned in your game BLR 80, there's brain computer interface, where you'll be possibly inside a simulation playing a game. That's too future way off, but today we have these games where you have earned to play games, learn to play games. We gamificate is the gamification of everything. We gamifying education, we gamifying healthcare, we gamifying work. In this scenario, how do you think games are gonna impact the world?
Well, games will always be around. Right, they've always been around. They will always be around.
I think we are sitting in an exciting space, and I think there's more need for us to ask these deep questions. Because while we answer these deep questions, which could look a little silly and stupid at this point in time, in the next couple of years, these stand to become reality. And I guess we as people who are in this ecosystem as the front runners, it helps if we kind of make the road a little clearer, by not just kind of painting or making people understand what the ecosystem is today, but what it's gonna look like tomorrow. What that will do, I feel, is that the ones who are just about getting into the ecosystem, they'll be a little bit more prepared to build, play a role in building that future, which is possibly more beneficial. Because I think so far, all of our industries have been very top-down, hierarchical, very, very self-preserving. But I guess, the future, what we are building, we're building the Metaverse, or we're building the Web 3.0. We talk about these big terms, throw these big things like, decentralization, interoperability, which nobody is ready for. But I think that what I try and address through these, the podcast is not just the simple things of how it's addressed, but in a broader way. So everybody, tries to think a little broad, and not narrow, because we are living in an exciting space, and we living in a world where having conversations is so very important, because through conversations there are chances of anybody and everybody who's honest to his profession, reach out to a wider audience. And I do this in that hope. I'm a fan of your work, though I have not seen your work or neither experienced those games. But when I speak to you, I feel your honesty, and I feel your hunger of the intent of building games which can reach out to a larger audience. And I need to stress out to my listeners that building a game is shit fucking difficult, and you need a huge company to do that. And here you are, a single person doing the entire back end all by yourself. So kudos to you. and wish you a lot of success. Thank you for taking time and being part of the podcast. I wish you a lot of success with BLR 80. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. And until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. Really appreciate this.
Thank you, Eddie.